And welcome to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical, Majid Nawaz. Today, as should be on your screens about now, we are discussing the Trump plan for a Gaza board of peace. You see the graphic on your screens. That's an image of President Trump sitting at the top of a board table and empty seats around him with an image of a utterly devastated Gaza in the background. Today, we want to bring to you news as to what this board is, who it or who is planned to sit on it, what its structure looks like, and what it means in a broader sense for the region and for the world. All of this unfolds as Trump heads to Davos for the annual World Economic Forum conference to launch the Board of Peace and announce and clarify further exactly what he has in mind. That's all coming up here for this Warrior Creed live stream. So stay with us. You're listening to The Radical Majid Nawaz. We'll be back right after this.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. Today, we are discussing Trump's Gaza Board of Peace. Who has been invited to Trump's Gaza boards? There is more than one, but they all sit underneath a top one, which he is the chairman of. We're bringing you details as to exactly what this means for the region, as well as how you can understand these developments in the context of the framework that we here at Radical Media have been providing for you to understand these world developments. All of this fits consistently with what our regulars will know we've been speaking to on the Warrior Creed live stream for quite some time. Trump's announcement of a Gaza Board of Peace confirms to us, as we reasserted after his decisive intervention in Venezuela and the Maduro raid, that the world's powers, the great powers, that is so far Russia, China, and the US, have agreed to divide the world between them into spheres of influence. And of course, the decision of Trump to enter into Venezuela and take out Maduro was, on a deeper level, a decision to assert American dominance in Venezuela as falling fair and square in accordance to the Monroe Doctrine, adapted by Trump to become the Donroe Doctrine, to fall well within the US sphere of influence that the Monroe Doctrine outlined. This is an old US doctrine, but it confirmed for us the view that, of course, Russia, with its interests in the Crimea and the ethnically Russian parts of Ukraine and Eurasia as a whole, Russia will seek to exert its own dominance and influence in that region. China, of course, with the Pacific region, China already has its eyes on Taiwan. The US likewise positioning to seize Greenland. All of this points to the fact that China, Russia, and the United States of America under President Trump, in order to avoid World War III, have agreed to divide the world up into spheres of influence. And part of that requires settling the Middle East conflict, not least because these world powers sit on opposite ends of the Middle East conflict, but also because the Middle East itself will eventually rise as its own power and have its own sphere of influence in the Middle East, as we're about to demonstrate to you as well. But let's begin with the news of the Gaza Board of Peace. And here on your screens now, as Sky News reports, and we'll read that for you as it is. Sky News breaking: a draft charter for Trump's Gaza Board of Peace has a 3-year membership term, except for those who contribute $1 billion, according to Reuters. And here is a clip from Sky News explaining those details. Take a listen to this.
News to bring you now from the US. We're hearing via the Reuters news agency more about the board of peace that Donald Trump is setting up to oversee the rebuilding of Gaza. You may remember yesterday, Sir Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, was announced as sitting on that board. Well, now we're hearing that the draft charter for Donald Trump's Board of Peace has a 3-year membership term, except, though, for those who contribute $1 billion in cash funds. This is according to a document seen by Reuters. This morning, King Abdullah of Jordan has been invited to take part. We heard yesterday that the leaders of Turkey and Egypt had received letters asking them to do the same. And as I mentioned before, Tony Blair is sitting on that board as well to oversee the rebuilding of Gaza. But now we hear the draft charter for this Board of Peace has, 2 elements to it. A 3-year membership term, except for those who stump up $1 billion in cash funds. We will bring you more on that as we get it.
Now, as you heard there, the President Trump has asked for countries, not individuals, of course, countries to put forward $1 billion in order to become members, permanent members, to this Board of Peace, similar to the United Nations Security Council, where there are currently permanent members with veto power. The difference would be that after the United Nations, after World War II, when the United Nations was formed, the powers that were strong and were in fact the victors post World War II were those that got to sit on the United Nations Security Council. They included Russia, of course, the United States of America, but they included China. Now, so far, understandable. But they also included what could only be described today as middle-ranking powers, such as France, and, dare I say, being from here and loving my country very much, the United Kingdom. Now, the United Kingdom is still perhaps more powerful militarily than France by objective metrics that can be measured. Nevertheless, it is nowhere near the military might and capacity that can be mustered by China, Russia, and in particular, the United States of America, which dwarfs everybody in terms of military might. The United States of America currently, and under its current president, President Trump, is the closest thing you will get to a world imperial power. And the very interesting thing, and rightly so, mind you, is that just as it was positioned to be able to attempt to dominate the world institutions, such as the UN, such as the European Union, such as other World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, other world bodies, just as it was positioned to be able to dominate those, of course, that move may well have provoked World War III. Under the powerful United States, which dwarfs all other countries in terms of its military might, the US has decided under Trump instead to withdraw from the world in accordance to the Monroe Doctrine, and that is to withdraw to a specific sphere of influence, that sphere being the Western Hemisphere, which in political language doesn't mean all of the West, it means the American continents, North and South America plus Canada. That side of the planet is where America has formally now explicitly stated it will police. By going into Venezuela and taking out Maduro is one example of the US policing its own backyard. So the US under Trump deliberately pulled back from world dominance, just as it was about to be able to militarily dwarf all others, because this position it was in is known in political doctrine as the Thucydides trap. When you have a world power in that position of absolute dominance, but you have rising powers such as China coming up on its tails, seeking to overtake the dominant power, historically, we know, and this is what the Thucydides trap is, we know that that transfer or that overtaking doesn't happen without sparking war. And so to avoid World War III, President Trump and the other great powers, including Putin and Xi, have, it appears to be, and this is something that is consistent with everything unfolding on the world stage, as we've been commenting on, it appears to be the case that they have instead decided to divide the world up into three distinct spheres. Now, those three spheres are easily understood when looking at Russia and Eurasia, China and the Pacific, and the US and the Western Hemisphere. But they do leave some gaping big fat holes. And one of them is the Middle East, because the Middle East, of course, isn't in any of those three great powers' backyards. And it does, though, leave a huge power vacuum as to who's going to police the Middle East. Another big hole is Europe, and we'll come to both of those individually over the course of this stream. And this is where Trump's Middle East Peace Initiative comes in, because for the division of the world into spheres of interest to work, for, in other words, in the American context, for the Monroe Doctrine to work, it requires not only the collaboration of the other great powers, Russia and China, but it also requires for the voids, such as the Middle East, and the vacuum there, with a power vacuum there, to be stabilized. And that's why we're seeing, and we have seen over the course of this week, Syria become stabilized under Ahmed al-Shara, with him integrating the Kurdish regions into his central government authority, with Saudi backing, Turkish backing as well. And as we'll come to, we've also seen an expansion of the Saudi-Pakistani Defense Pact, which is akin to a Muslim NATO, with the addition or the application for membership by Turkey, not yet approved by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. But as we stated very clearly, the Middle East will eventually get its own sphere of influence. And you're seeing the beginnings of that in the form of the joint Saudi, Pakistani, and Turkish Defense Pact, which would form a form of Middle Eastern NATO to stabilize the Middle East. And that will become the fourth sphere as well. So for that to work, for the world in its division into spheres and to avoid World War III to work, Trump needs to stabilize the Middle East. And this brings us to what we wrote on the 16th of October, 2025, when President Trump first signed his Gaza deal with 8 Muslim majority countries on board. If you remember, that was in Egypt, and Hamas. All of them, including the terrorist group Hamas, signed on to Trump's Gaza peace deal. And at the time, as we wrote in the analysis that's on your screens now, there were many who were praying for the failure of Trump's Gaza peace deal. As you can see from this graphic here, there is a bereft Palestinian woman on her knees praying to God, please work, under a heading, a Gaza peace deal announced. But next to her, this is, of course, a political satire. Next to her is an image of a Western woman with blue hair and a rainbow flag on her knees praying to God, please fail. And it really does, this image, point to the stark contrast in what we're dealing with here. And that is that there are those in the West with a vested interest and ideological reasons for wanting to see Trump fail. And it goes beyond the blue-haired lady. This sentiment is translated into our political structures, in particular in Europe. There is an interest, especially in globalist-controlled corporate media. There is an interest to ensure that Trump is not only perceived to be a failure, but actually goes on to fail. And part of that is because if President Trump succeeds in stabilizing the Middle East, he then succeeds in dividing the world up into those three spheres, the Monroe Doctrine, for which states that the American sphere is the North and South Americas. But what does that do? That means the failure for now of the globalists, who instead were seeking to unite the world under their technocratic system through their international bodies, such as the EU, the UN, and so on and so forth. And you can understand Brexit in the context of the United Kingdom using that framework. Those Eurosceptics in Britain that initiated Brexit were concerned about the rise of this globalist superpower, this globalist technocracy that would have emerged through the global institutions such as the EU and the UN, and as a result, decided to take the United Kingdom out of the supranational infrastructure of the European Union, which was a first blow to the globalist agenda, and it was severely resisted by globalists at the time. Now, That all feels like a very long time ago, and a much younger me at the time voted Remain, mind you. Keep in mind, not following this side of politics at the time as I was, consumed by counterterrorism and the specific agenda of the Middle East and counter extremism. Obviously, a lot of us had to work out what was going on at the time when that happened, and the rest is history. Here we are now. But that explains that background, and it's why it's so important for President Trump to be able to stabilize the Middle East. Without a stable Middle East, he cannot stabilize the other regions of the world in accordance to what we have already stated multiple times is a grand regional settlement for peace concluded between him, the US, China, and Russia. And of course, the globalists will do everything possible to make sure that President Trump doesn't succeed. Hence, this political satire on your screens. Take a look at it one more time. That's what it's commenting on. That is why people do not want President Trump to succeed in stabilizing the Middle East, because it means the end, for now at least, of their globalist project. Now, moving on, the full charter of Trump's Board of Peace, as you can see on your screens now, and reported by the Times of Israel. That is the full text. We will place that full text in the Radical Dispatch, the written version of this stream for you tomorrow. Suffice to say for now that full text it's peculiar for one reason alone. And that is that though the United Nations, after Trump's initial Gaza peace deal, agreed to Trump setting up a Gaza Board of Peace, they did so until 2027, specifically with only Gaza in mind. And yet Trump's Board of Peace, the charter, the full text for which we'll send out tomorrow in the Radical Dispatch, does not state the word Gaza. The charter is worded in an entirely neutral way. And indeed, with Trump's announcement that great powers can pay $1 billion to join it, there are concerns among certain other globalists who control those institutions that we've just mentioned, where they are seeking to create a global technocracy. They are concerned that Trump is seeking to undermine and then usurp global institutions such as the UN and the EU and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum with his own Board of Peace. And that's why he's asking for great powers to pay $1 billion to join. So the charter doesn't mention Gaza whatsoever, lending credence to the concern as voiced by some Europeans that that's what Trump is seeking to do. He's seeking to replace the UN. But that is so far only a concern. It has no further backing other than the concern and noises being made by the Europeans, not least Macron, which we'll come to in a minute. So who is a part of Trump's Board of Peace for Gaza? You can see here on your screens Al Jazeera reporting on the 18th of January with that headline, who is a part of Trump's Gaza Board of Peace? Well, we have an interesting graphic here for you, which again will blow up on the screen so you can see it properly, because there's a lot of confusion around exactly what this is. And we feel this graphic, published by the European Council on Foreign Relations, which we will also include in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, really does break down at least the structure of what this looks like. And if you look at that, you see at the top left, under the big heading Board of Peace, you see Chairman Donald J. Trump. He is currently poised to be the permanent chairman. Those countries that have so far accepted are Argentina, Hungary, and Kazakhstan. As of the time of this chart being made, news has reached us that the UAE has also now accepted, and so should be included in that rectangle at the top left there, headed Board of Peace with those other countries, Argentina, Hungary, and Kazakhstan. And it's fully expected that other countries will accept. There's very little reason why they wouldn't, because membership is free. It lasts 3 years, but only permanent membership costs $1 million. But the important thing there, if you look at the structure, is that the entire structure, according to the European Council on Foreign Relations, seems to be advised at the top there, next to the rectangle Board of Peace, senior advisors, Aria Lightstone and Josh Greenbaum. But the interesting thing is Aria Lightstone there is from something called the Abraham Accord Peace Institute, which is interesting because the Board of Peace seems to be being advised right from the top there by those who have an interest in securing the Abraham Accord peace deal. Underneath the Board of Peace rectangle is what's called an executive board. In that executive board, Trump has named Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, Steve Witkoff, the US Special Envoy, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and of course, his sometime peace envoy as well. And in a surprise for many, Trump also named Tony Blair in the executive board. And then to continue, Mark Rowan, who is from a global management fund, Ajay Banga from the World Bank Group, Robert Gabriel, Deputy National Security Advisor, and Nikolai Mladimov, who is a high representative. And that's all it states there under his name, with a question mark next to him. Next to the executive board, underneath the box that says senior advisors, there's another one called Gaza Executive Board. And that contains also Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, but others such as the Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister. And another one there, the former chief of staff to the former, to the brother of the leader of Qatar, and that is Ali Al-Thawadi. That's there representing the country of Qatar. Another, General Hassan Rashad from Egypt. And then again, Tony Blair, Mark Rowan, Reem Al-Hashimi from the UAE. Again, Nikolai Mladimov. And so you see there other names. Yakir Gabi, a Cypriot Israeli businessman, a bit random. And Sigrid, is that Kang? Former UN Assistant Secretary General. So that's the structure of the board. Here is an image of that structure with the faces of the relevant people. We will include all of this in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, so don't worry too much if it's all too small for you to see at the moment. But those images are of the various people that were at least sitting on the board. We mentioned earlier that the board has the peace board is actually more than one board, and that's part of the issue here. That there's what was confusing about it is that there seems to be a larger overall board and then smaller boards sitting underneath it. The executive board and then the confusingly named Gaza executive board not being the same thing, but containing some of the same names. It may well be that some of this is yet to be ironed out, but nevertheless, here is a poster inside Trump's Board of Peace for Gaza. Here is a poster of the faces of all of those that are currently named to be sitting on it. We will publish all this tomorrow in the Radical Dispatch for you as well. The key thing now is we're going to move to some analysis. The key thing is how certain countries have responded to this. Now, on your screens about now, you should be able to see a BBC headline from the 18th of January. And it is an interesting one because, of course, peace in Gaza directly and immediately concerns Israel as one of the major countries involved in that conflict. And, of course, then the Palestinian Authority as a quasi, not quite yet country. So for all the countries that are involved, Israel is the one that is the most directly involved because the Palestinians don't yet have a country. And yet, as the BBC reported yesterday, you can see the headline there, Israel pushes back on Trump's picks for executives on the Gaza Board of Peace. We're going to read an extract from that BBC headline for you. It states, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has convened a meeting with his top advisors to discuss Donald Trump's Board of Peace for Gaza after it revealed the US did not include Israel in talks to do with its creation. Now, that is a very interesting anecdote with regards to this Board of Peace. If it is true that President Trump did not include Israel in the conversations around setting up this board, if it is true that Israel was not consulted, and if it is true, as the BBC is reporting, you saw it on your screens, that as a result, Israel is objecting to some of this, then that is very interesting because it does slightly push back against some of those who have become somewhat skeptical of President Trump over the course of the last few months, in particular since his action in Venezuela against Maduro, that he is not America first, but rather he is Israel first. But this clearly, in the BBC, if it holds that Israel wasn't consulted when Trump devised the peace board pushes back against that perspective and demonstrates, in fact, that there still is some clear water between what is American policy and what is Israeli policy. And though, of course, in many instances their interests overlap, as do Britain's and Israel's, in other areas those interests do not overlap. And we can see that clearly in the case of the United Kingdom, because it was one of those countries that recognized the creation of a Palestinian state, even though America didn't. But this example here demonstrates, if it holds, as we say, in the BBC's reporting it, it demonstrates a clear example of where US interests and Israeli interests have not overlapped. In fact, the Israelis are objecting that they were not included in Trump's decision to set up that board and decide who sits on it. Now, the reason, as hopefully you'll see now, when we go back to the articles on your screens, the reasons include some of Israel's concerns around other countries that are sitting, that have been invited by Trump to sit on his peace board. And we'll come to those about now. So South Asia Index reports the following, and that should be on your screens now. We'll blow it up so you can all see that. This is from yesterday. Israel rejects Trump's Board of Peace for Gaza, says it will not accept Pakistan and Turkey as members. Now, that is very significant. First of all, for Israel not to accept it puts a spanner in the entire process, because, of course, the country directly affected by this most is Israel. It is a territorial dispute over land that currently Israel controls. And so it would require Israeli buy-in. And that comes down to Trump and how much influence he's able to exert over Israel via Netanyahu. But the other interesting point with this is what we've been saying in our analysis. If you go back to our Warrior Creed live stream on Venezuela and to our written version, The Radical Dispatch, and prior to that, if you go back further to our Warrior Creed live stream on Trump's Middle East peace after the Gaza peace deal was signed in Egypt, and go back to The Radical Dispatch, the written version about that, you'll see that we made something very clear. And we believe this reconfirms our analysis that we began today's stream with. And that is that though the Monroe Doctrine implies, and its updated, modernized version being the Donroe Doctrine, implies that the United States of America will police its own sphere of influence, the North and South Americas, and China will police its own sphere of influence in the Pacific region, and Eurasia will be policed by Russia as its sphere of influence. There was a big fat hole in the Middle East. And we put forward the view that the Middle East will end up eventually getting its own sphere of influence to police, and that the defense pact between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia was an early indication of that Muslim, Middle Eastern, Muslim NATO developing. And the fact that Turkey asked to join that defense pact this week is further strengthening our view there. And this news on your screens also further strengthens it, that Israel is concerned about the Turks and the Pakistanis being on that board of peace. Why? Because part of what was signed by Trump in Egypt with those 8 Muslim majority countries when they signed up to the Gaza peace, and Hamas as well signed, the reason we mention that is that all these so-called anti-imperialist hard leftists that we call the regressive left may object as loudly as they like to the peace deal that Trump signed in Egypt. But the people that they champion as heroes of the resistance, Hamas, themselves signed up to Trump's deal. So whenever you hear or see somebody anonymous online complaining about Trump's Gaza peace deal that was signed in Egypt being some form of tool of modern imperialism under MAGA, do remind them that even Hamas signed up to Trump's peace deal. And who are they, as an online anon, probably not even based in Palestine, to complain about something that the region, including 8 Muslim majority countries, all signed up to? Now, with that said, there was initial conversation around either Pakistan or Turkey having peacekeeping troops on the ground in Gaza. And that is in particular what Israel seems to be objecting to. That hasn't yet been resolved, but it is an area to watch out for. But as now is on your screens, since the news yesterday, only in the last couple of hours, you should be able to see this now. It has been confirmed that the UAE has accepted President Trump's invitation to sit on the board of peace. And that's on your screens now, alongside the UAE statement of acceptance. This, of course, will be a temporary position unless they pay the $1 billion, which the UAE may or may not do. But if they pay $1 billion, they get a permanent position on this board of peace. Now, about that $1 million, again, it is interesting that only a great power, a China or a US or a Russia, could even contemplate paying that much. The United Kingdom certainly probably wouldn't be paying $1 billion to have a permanent seat on that board of peace. It remains to be seen who else would. But again, it's as if Trump wanted to deliberately exclude smaller countries from joining as permanent members of his board of peace, pointing to his disappointment at how the UN Security Council ended up with middle-ranking countries, such as France, probably such as the UK as well, as much as it pains me to say so, sitting as permanent members of the Security Council, having an outsized influence on world affairs while being relatively smaller countries when it comes to their modern-day strength in the world affairs. Certainly France isn't as strong as it once used to be. So perhaps Trump's threshold of $1 billion was to deliberately filter out smaller countries, but that doesn't resolve the question of uber wealthy countries that don't actually have strong militaries, but that may still be able to afford to pay the $1 billion. But nevertheless, nobody has so far agreed to pay it. So the UAE accepting is only insofar as they've joined as a free member, which is that 3-year term. And all of this is so new at the moment, we really don't know what's going to happen next. But as Russia Today reports on your screens now, they've confirmed, Russian state media, that is, have confirmed that Putin and the Russians have indeed received the charter from Trump to join the Board of Peace. And Russia Today says 58 countries, including Russia, India, China, Belarus, Brazil, the UAE, Pakistan, and Ukraine, have been invited to join the board by the US. And that's according to Bloomberg. And the Russians made a statement, which we will play for you now, telling us where they are currently and what their thinking is around Trump's invitation. Take a listen to this.
I have already said in my introductory remarks, and Dmitry Peskov confirmed that yesterday, that President Putin has received an invitation by President Trump to become a part of the Board of Peace. We have also received annex to that letter, a rather lofty document called a charter of the Board of Peace that states that the board will be prepared to deal not only with the Gaza sector, I don't think it's even mentioned there, but it will be tasked with the resolution of conflicts around the world. And naturally, we'd like to clear up the conceptual vision and the practical vision of our American colleagues of this initiative. We're trying to clear these matters up. We'll keep in touch.
So there we have the Russians stating that they confirmed they've received the invitation, but that there's a lot left to clear up and that they're in conversation with the Americans as to exactly what the implications are of that invitation. No doubt, as either now as we're on air or sometime after today's stream, Trump would have announced more in Davos, where he currently is, to speak to the World Economic Forum. So we can include within the written version of this stream tomorrow in the Radical Dispatch any updates that Trump may give at Davos. But here on your screens is the Chinese confirming as well that they did receive an invitation. It states there, when asked about China's position on the establishment of the Gaza Board of Peace proposed by the US President Donald Trump and whether China has received invitation to join it, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Gao Jiakun said on Tuesday that the Chinese side has already received the invitation from the US side. So the Chinese also, but Macron peculiarly, and the European position, as we say, the Europeans are not happy with the Monroe Doctrine realignment, the Donroe Doctrine, that is that the United States of America deciding that it will only from now on police the North and South Americas, not concern itself with the rest of the world. The Europeans aren't happy with that because NATO was meant to be, post-World War II, the security pact that guarantees the defense of Europe against any Russian incursion. Trump's no longer really much interested in NATO. NATO still, of course, survives, but the Monroe Doctrine and its corollary, the Donroe Doctrine, pretty much runs anathema to NATO because, as a doctrine, it states that the United States of America will only be concerned with policing the North and South Americas. That leaves NATO stranded. The Europeans, of course, that's why they're so upset. Macron has rejected, so far, as we know, the invitation to join the border peace, but that may well change. And here is Trump on that situation. We'll just play this video for you so you can hear it for yourself. Trump confirming in this video that the Russians have received his invitation and that he thinks that if he wanted to, he could coax Macron into accepting. Take a listen to this.
President Putin to be a member of the Board of Peace? Yeah, he's been invited. And do you have any response to President Macron saying he will not join the Board of Peace? Oh, did he say that? Well, yeah. Nobody wants him because he's going to be out of office very soon. So, that's all right. What I'll do is if they feel like Costco, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join. But he doesn't have to join. If he said that, you're probably giving it to me a little bit differently. But if he actually did say that, but as you know, he's going to be out of office in a few months.
Did you invite?
The key thing there is that Trump saying that ultimately he doesn't have to join, but if he wanted him to join, he could make him join, but also that nobody really cares about Macron because Macron will be out of office in a few months. Now, as we're speaking on air, Macron was speaking at Davos, strangely, with sunglasses on. It's very curious. We don't know why he was wearing sunglasses, but Macron was speaking at Davos with his sunglasses firmly on indoors. Now, Trump is due there, as we speak about Davos, Trump is due to announce the charter and launch it at Davos. This is the charter signing scheduled for Thursday at 10:30 a.m. in Davos. That's on your screens now, as reported by Dropsite News. You can see that there. And this is the invitation. President of the United States invites the chief of state or head of government to sign the Board of Peace Charter. That's the Thursday, January 23rd, 10:30 a.m. at the Davos Congress Center on the margins of the World Economic Forum. So we will learn more about this at Davos as the news unfolds. Trump headed there now. Even Nigel Farage is headed there. Now, there are some concerned, as we stated earlier, on the European side and on the, let's say, those still defending the old world order, which, by the way, is pretty much on its way out. The old world order, meaning the pre-COVID, pre-2019 world order. Those still who are yet to adjust to the fact the world will never be the same again are concerned, and they are phrasing their concern in the following ways. As Reuters reports, I think this is a trap that the Trump administration laid for the international community. And this is somebody who's a research fellow at the Quincy Institute. We'll just play the clip for you so you can hear their perspective on why they think that Trump's Gaza border peace is a trap. Take a listen to this.
A sense coming mainly from the administration that they would like to broaden the reach of the Board of Peace and to even talking about replacing the current UN system. There's talk about charging countries $1 billion to join this Board of Peace. So it's clear that Gaza might be the beginning, but it isn't the end of the Board of Peace as far as the Trump administration is concerned. And it may, that secondary role of kind of replacing existing multilateral institutions might even be more of a priority than its primary function in Gaza for this administration, since Gaza doesn't really have any real strategic value for Donald Trump. I think this is a trap that the Trump administration laid for the international community, and they fell into it. I mean, let's not forget that the Security Council endorsed the Trump 20-point plan, including the Board of Peace, despite the fact that it circumvented existing multilateral organizations like the Security Council itself and the General Assembly, and what we know about the Trump administration's hostility toward these institutions.
Now, what the senior researcher there from the Quincy Institute fails to understand or comprehend, perhaps, is the way in which the world is changing. Those multilateral institutions that he's concerned will be replaced by the Board of Peace are already pretty much on their way out. Now, that's not going to transpire in the next 5 or even 10 years. But the president of the United States is making it very clear that he's not interested in global institutions. And what we are putting forward is that what they're really interested in is each great power policing its own sphere of influence and realigning the world around the way in which it's changed since World War II. You've got countries such as Turkey that have a super influential role in the Middle East. France and the United Kingdom no longer have such an influential role in the Middle East. So why should Turkey, for example, not be sitting on the Security Council of the UN? Now, there's a question that when you look at the Middle East and Turkey's role that it's played in Syria and that it continues to play with Saudi Arabia, there's a question that doesn't have a direct answer. But the circumventing of the existing multilateral organizations through this Board of Peace does address it head on, because, of course, the Turkish foreign minister has a place on the Board of Peace. So this is partly why Trump's doing this, because the world is changing and the world needs to adapt to the way that it's changing. And at the UN, they were asked about this. This is the UN deputy spokesperson, and he was asked about Trump's Board of Peace by a journalist, and this is what he had to say. Take a listen to this.
Any invitation to be on that board?
I'm not aware of any communication that we've received on any of this.
Secondly, what's the reaction from the Secretary General that if you want to maintain a permanent member in that board, you have to pay up to, not up to, but actually $1 billion in the first year of the membership?
We've seen these reports. We can't confirm this.
No,
obviously, the United Nations
charter,
has no...
This is the charter of the Board of Peace.
Yes. Obviously, different groupings have their own rules, their own bylaws, and so forth. We don't comment on other groups and their rules. Obviously, that's something for anyone participating in those groupings to consider.
Is that correct? Is that a right approach here? This is the Board of Peace has been welcomed by the Secretary General, right? If I remember correctly.
The Board of Peace has been authorized by the Security Council for its work on Gaza, strictly for that. We're not talking about the wider operations or any of the aspects that have been in the media for the last several days. What we're talking about is the work on Gaza. As you know, we have welcomed the ceasefire in Gaza and measures to support it, including the Board of Peace, and we'll continue to work with all parties on the ground to make sure that the ceasefire is upheld. That is about Gaza. The larger aspects are things for anyone wanting to participate in this grouping to consider. Obviously, the UN has its own charter, its own rules, and you can do your own compare and contrast between the respective organizations.
Since you mentioned about the assertion lately in the media, is this Board of Peace can be a substitute or replacement of the Security Council or UN itself? How would you define the relationship between the UN body and this Board of Peace now?
As you're well aware, the UN has coexisted alongside any number of organizations. There are regional organizations, sub-regional organizations, various defense alliances around the world. Some of them we have relationship agreements with, some of them we don't. We would have to see, in terms of details, what the Board of Peace becomes as it actually is established, to know what sort of relationship we would have with it.
Does the Secretary General intend to work with the Board of Peace on the particular issue of Gaza?
You've seen what the Security Council resolution has been, and obviously we work in line with that resolution. Yes, Pam and then Sinan.
So there you have it. That is the UN claiming that this will not replace the UN, that the Board of Peace has a specific remit to focus on Gaza, but it's not quite clear from President Trump's announcement that that's the case. Inviting members to join permanently for $1 billion, I imagine if you're going to pay as a country $1 billion to join something, you don't want it to disappear tomorrow. Otherwise, where's your money gone? And so there is some relevant concern around what exactly is happening here. But it also doesn't matter too much to Trump because of what's on your screens now. Trump has already said last week, when asked about international law, he says, as reported by Spectator Index, President Trump says his own morality is the only constraint on his power as commander-in-chief, and that I do not need international law. That's according to an interview with the New York Times. So what's going on here? And how can we, to conclude, how can we understand everything that we are seeing unfold very rapidly on the world stage? Well, we've attempted to put this all together for you in one big commentary on that last statement there made by President Trump, that he doesn't care about international law. So we'll read it for you as is on your screens now. This is our response to that. What we've said is outrage at this line, and that is Trump not caring about international law. Outrage at this line relies on a number of assumptions. We'll carry on reading this, and you'll see where we're getting to because it chimes with our previous analysis as well. Outrage at this line relies on a number of assumptions. Importantly, whether international law exists, and if it does, who polices it. Our view is that international law does exist as a global customary law, but the conundrum is about who polices it. Whichever body gets to police global law will inevitably become the globalist technocracy. Once global authority to police international law in this way is conceded to anybody, there is no escape from its eventual evolution to a globalist one world government. The only answer to this conundrum is decentralization. Trump's adaptation of Monroe becoming Donroe, as we discussed last week, is a contemporary version of the answer who polices it, coming in the form of de-escalation from globalism in order to incrementally move closer to said decentralization by retreating away from a global imperialist stage to a regional position. The regional position being the North and South Americas for the US, Eurasia for Russia, and the Pacific region for China. To continue reading, America's trajectory, direction of travel from being a global neoconservative imperialist superpower under previous presidents to a regional, America's focused policy grounded in the Monroe Doctrine under Trump, is a retreat from globalist empire. In the trajectory sense, that is. This is why the Americans pulled out of Afghanistan and why the Russians voluntarily withdrew their navy from Syria. The world will return in this way to regional multilateralism. Ignoring this administration's trajectory as situated in time renders one unable to choose the correct gear to be traveling in alongside it. This is an issue many appear to be struggling with. It is understandable, but still wrong. Our world will not enter World War III. Of that, we assure you. Instead, it will de-escalate from one previous global superpower, unilateralism, to dividing itself into spheres of influence. And this is what we've been speaking about throughout the course of this stream. Those spheres of influence will be Russia, China, and the US. They will be the initial three spheres. But the Middle East will also eventually get its own sphere of influence. Each power will police its own sphere. This is decentralization in practice. It is incremental. Any globalist uniparty that seeks to police this world using global aspirations for international law or anything else as their pretense for their globalist imperialism will lose. So this is what we think is going on. And the key point here is that the world will be divided into spheres of influence. The Middle East will eventually get its own sphere of influence, but that breakup is to avoid the world eventually coalescing under these international institutions such as the UN, the WEF, the WHO, the EU, and then once coalesced, forming a one world government. The only way to avoid that is decentralization. Now, by no means should a breakdown of the world into 3, 4, 5 spheres of influence signify the end of said decentralization. It should merely represent the beginning of it. The world internally within those spheres of influence must continue to decentralize. Even within central governments within nations and countries, power must devolve away from the center and continue on that trajectory. That's what we believe in. It's why devolution in the United Kingdom sense was a good thing. It's why autonomous regions are a good thing. The more you decentralize power away from centralized government, closer to the people, further from centers of power, the smaller the state becomes, the smaller government is, and the more liberty, therefore, people enjoy. That process of global, both external and internal decentralization can indeed be aided by AI, because AI isn't necessarily all bad. Of course, in the global one world government technocracy sense, it's a terrible thing. But if you were to begin decentralizing governments and you had a decentralized tech base where there wasn't one unified power, where there wasn't one unified database, but in a decentralized way, if tech could also be used to fill in those gaps where government gets smaller and smaller, the future could well be a decentralized world with decentralized countries and people enjoying more liberty than they have ever at least enjoyed since the invention of the modern day Westphalian nation state, but also more security than they've enjoyed since the invention of the modern day Westphalian nation state, because the conundrum had always been that centralized power brings security and stability, but at the cost of liberty. If we can get this conundrum right, and that is to have efficient government, but small government with the use and aiding of tech and AI, but in a decentralized way, you've at once managed to achieve, you've avoided an overemphasis on centralized power while maintaining stability and preserving liberty. Now, avoiding World War III is a key part of that, and the decentralization away from one world government in the form of international bodies like the UN is a step in the right direction, but should by no means be the last stage in that process. And to continue there, some of this we've explained that's on your screens now. Some of this we've explained in last week's Radical Dispatch, but we will update it all for you in the written version of today's stream in the Radical Dispatch that we publish tomorrow. But last week's there, the Donro Doctrine, Venezuela, Maduro, and the American supercontinent. That's all explained there, contextualizing exactly what Trump did in Venezuela with Maduro. And since then, exactly as we've said, spheres of influence emerging. The Alexander Dugin, the Kremlin thinker, if you like, appears to have confirmed the same. He says, we've nothing against the annexation of Greenland and the war between the US and the EU, but Eurasia, Ukraine included, belongs to us. We have our own Russian version of the Monroe Doctrine, Eurasia for Eurasianists. Now, that statement by Alexander Dugin, who's a key Kremlin thinker, it pretty much confirms for us this spheres of influence view, that there is a grand regional settlement for peace, and it is that the world is going to be broke up into regions, and those regions will be policed by the dominant power of that region, Russia, China, America, and an emergent power in the Middle East that will police the Middle East for itself. And we'll end up with autonomous regions in the world, 4 or 5 of them at least. Of course, the conundrum is what happens to Europe. And somebody actually asked us that question. But before we get there, here is more on the Middle East's region. We mentioned the Saudi-Pakistani Defense Pact. And since mentioning that last week, more news has emerged, and that is that the Turks requested to join that defense pact as well. As you can see in the Clash report on your screens now, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey have drafted a trilateral defense agreement after months of talks. Pakistan's defense production minister confirms the draft is still under review and requires full consensus. The key thing is that the Saudis and the Turks, the Saudis and the Pakistanis have their own defense pact. It's ratified, it's signed. The Turks are now asking to join. That's the one that is yet to be fully agreed. But that is the direction of travel, the Middle East will get its own sphere of influence as well. And then, of course, that leaves the question, as the questioner here on your screens is asking us, in response to what we've just read out to you, can you explain what you think is likely to happen to Europe? Seems to be the pressure from both the USA and Russia now, right? So, yes, you can see our answer there. What we've said there, we've said Europe can pivot to the Middle East or Russia. They decide, but they're on their own. I know which way I'd turn. Europe can decide which way it wants to pivot, or indeed it can try under France and Germany to unite and create a continental power in mainland Europe. Either way, they'll be on their own. America will not be interested in policing Europe. Russia isn't interested beyond Ukraine. China may well economically come to dominate Europe, but of course, politically, Europe, in the form of maybe Germany and France, may well need to look to see what it does. We would advise the Europeans to look towards Russia for their economic collaboration and not China. At least Russia doesn't have a technocratic one-party system. Already they're getting their gas from the Russians, their oil. They could well look to Russia for cooperation and to the Middle East for labor and manpower. But that's up to the Europeans. Britain, the United Kingdom, it is pretty much clear that it will end up in the Atlanticist alliance. It seeks to go out on its own as a buccaneering island off continental Europe, not part of the German-French axis, but allied, crucially, to the United States of America, sharing with it its Anglo sphere. And the Five Eyes nations, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United Kingdom, those nations that speak English as their mother tongue, may well wish to float around in the Atlantic sphere. So this is some of what we think is going to unfold, and the implications of Trump's Gaza board of peace. Overall, it is good for world stability. We need to settle the Middle East conflict so that we bring stability to the Middle East. We need stability not only in Israel and Gaza, but also in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia, the entire greater Middle East that has been engulfed in so many wars, which, by the way, have been actually great power games and proxy wars fought by the great powers for natural resources in that region and for control of shipping routes and so on and so forth. The reason the Middle East has been engulfed in so many wars since the destruction of the Ottoman Empire in 1924 is precisely because it's so strategic in terms of trade routes such as the Suez Canal and so on and so forth. So having a stable Middle East will be good for that trade. Having a stable Middle East with a Middle Eastern power policing its own sphere will also be good for the world and for the other spheres, such as the Eurasian sphere and the American sphere as well. But so far, everything seems to be on course for how we've been suggesting things are going to unfold. Of course, more will unfold after this stream in Davos, because Trump is due to make an announcement there on Thursday when launching the signing of the peace board. And we'll bring you updates on that on our socials as all of that transpires. But for now, that's all we've got time for this week. You've been listening to the Radical Majid Nawaz for the Warrior Creed live stream. We will be putting up the written version of this stream via Radical Media. If you go to majidnawaz.substack.com and subscribe to Radical Media on Substack, you'll be able to access the written version with all the receipts and all the links and all the videos to this stream. For those who are premium paying members, you'll also be able to access the podcast version of this stream and gain other behind the paywall content, including early event access and in some instances, free access to private events that Radical Media organizes. So we can't do this without your support. Do go to majidnawaz.substack.com to subscribe. That's Radical Media on Substack. And until next week, we thank you for joining us.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
This service announcement brought to you in part by